Okay, welcome to episode 45 of the iPad podcast by Lexstar at maxfuture.com. And this is March 13th, 2011. And it's been a great week and probably one of the best weeks in iPad land. Why? Because finally the iPad 2 came out and I happened to score a couple. And I got, what did I get? I got the 64 gigabyte black 3G version on AT&T. Altogether, there are, 18 versions of the iPad 2. But anyways, if you listen to my other podcast, the Apple podcast, which came out yesterday, I talked about how I sold my first iPad on eBay for $425 plus shipping, and that was the 64 gigabyte Wi-Fi version of the iPad, and I decided to go for it and go for the iPad 2. So the first segment you're going to hear is about, I've got some, if you watch the video that I have of this podcast, you'll see the footage, the photos and the video that I shot as I was waiting in line at the Apple store on West 14th Street in Manhattan on March 11th. So let's go to that segment, and you'll also hear some live footage from that segment. Okay, so this is the footage. If you're watching also the video version of this podcast by maxfuture.com, this is the footage that I shot when I went to the West 14th Street Apple Store in New York to try to score some iPads. And this is... I'm walking now to the end of the line. This is like an hour before. And this is the spot that I found in line. And basically, it's at the corner of 10th Avenue and 14th Street. And that's looking up 10th Avenue. And so I was at the end of the line, maybe one block from the opening of the entrance of the Apple Store. And so I thought I had a pretty good position. These are the people in front of me in line. And, it was a nice day. And look, there's an Apple guy handing out water to people. Another Apple guy bringing, bottles of water. So there were a lot of Apple guys. So it was pleasant waiting in line. I didn't put him on the camera, but behind me there was a young kid who bought an iPad 17 days earlier. And he wanted to upgrade and change to the iPad. So here, finally, at 5 p.m., the line starts moving, and so we're being escorted. And this line was so long that the Apple people had to put breaks in, where the entrances to garages and stuff were. So the line had to break, and you had to be escorted. And I would say that generally the Apple people did a good job making sure nobody cut in line. Now, this Apple store is in the heart of the fashion industry and the meatpacking district. And actually, here are some people giving out Red Bull sodas to people. So we get some freebies in line. It's always like a carnival-like atmosphere. But Apple Store on West 14th Street is in the meatpacking district, which is now like a fashion place. There's a lot of fashion stores, and there's this beautiful new hotel there that's very chic. So Apple's located here in West 14th Street in a very sort of trendy location. So while we're waiting now it's after 5 o'clock.
Okay, so still waiting in line. It's about 6:10.
People
and it's
are
starting to get dark outside.
At this point it's 6:10.
You can sort of see the Apple Store off in the distance.
And it's getting dark outside, and I'm just really frustrated at this point why it's taking so long. So now it's well after 7. It's dark out. It's and you would think where I was in line that it wouldn't take that long for this line to move into the Apple Store, because I was well beyond halfway down the line. So, it got to be dark because, the store started selling at 5 o'clock, but I was still in line getting close to the store. There was a store next to the entrance of the Apple Store that had iPads floating in the window as part of a display, a very artistic display for a clothes store with all the iPads in sync. So, but still, it's now 7:30. 2.5 hours after they started selling the iPads, and I'm still outside the store. And they were just taking, groups in small batches. So it was very frustrating. And I thought, is it worth it? Is it worth waiting all this time for an iPad? Because you throw in the hour before. Finally, I'm at the point where I can see they're taking groups into the store, and the iPads were for sale on the second floor. So basically, when it was your time, they took you in groups of like 5 to 10, escorted up the stairs, and then they put you in this sort of holding pen on the second floor of the West 14th Street store in Manhattan. And I was very frustrated because and the guy in front of me was very frustrated because it looked like the iPads were being sold very slowly. It didn't make any sense because unlike the iPhone, you don't have to activate the iPad with any cell network. You should just be swiping cards and selling them. And the funny thing is, I asked some guy in the Apple store, and he gave me the most bizarre response. This was very funny, so I'll play it for you now.
What's the wait from this point to there?
You're actually not allowed to film.
But you guys make iPhones with cameras.
Right, you're not allowed to film me, though.
I can't film in the Apple store? I can't film in the Apple store. Apple's making cameras in the phones, and they don't want...
So, it took even a long time once we were in the store. So in the store, it was excruciatingly slow. We were in this sort of bullpen. I really didn't think it was very efficient. Normally, I buy in the Fifth Avenue store, which I think is, run better. And so it was kind of a frustrating experience. Now, one of the interesting things was that they actually had an Apple employee there who could speak sign language because there was a group of people in front of me who only communicated in sign language. So, I thought that was cool, and it was a happy story. And then when you got to the front of the line, you had to wait, and they had to have some Apple employee come and greet you and work one-on-one with you, and then they would go off and get the products. And it just took a long time. But if you look here, they were also setting up some people who wanted to be activated or activate the iPad with iTunes right there in the store. So that was also, I think, part of the slow up, that they were going out of their way to do in-store activation. But, look at this store. It looks kind of like lackadaisical, and you've got this tremendous line. I mean, I was in the top third of the line. So there were people in line, maybe 5-6 hours at this Apple store behind me. So overall, I think it took me like 4 hours to get an iPad. And this is looking out the window to the 9th Avenue traffic from the second floor as I'm waiting. I took this video while I was waiting. So eventually I get to the front, and they assign me to somebody, a nice person. And that's my bag. I got my iPad, and I'm leaving, and I'm looking sort of sideways out the store. Okay, so, I finally got home, and it was late, I guess, or later than I wanted to be home. I guess it was like almost 9 o'clock when I got home. And I did unwrap the iPad, and I didn't sync it at the store. A lot of people were syncing at the store, but frankly, I just wanted to have a clean sync of all my stuff from the first iPad. And I got to tell you, it worked beautifully. This is what I like. A lot of people complain about having the backup on iTunes, but I love it because you never have to worry about losing anything that's on your iPad. And it took a while. It took, 40 minutes or so, because I have a lot of data. I have the 64 gigabyte iPad 2 and the 64 gigabyte first iPad, and I was using up half that data, and I have hundreds and hundreds of apps. So I'd say, it took about 30 minutes, 40 minutes to sync my iPad 2 and get all my folders, all my settings, pretty much everything back in order. And my first initial reactions physically, it's somewhat similar to the first iPad, but also very, very different. I mean, the big differences are it's really thinner. You don't have the big curves on the back. It's the same substance on the back, that sort of silvery side. By the way, I also bought the black leather smart cover. Those were going like hotcakes. And I put it together, and it was, pretty amazing. It felt really. It feels just very light. It's only 15% lighter, but it feels significantly lighter than the first iPad, and thinner. So you just feel, it feels like closer to being just like this thin pad of paper. Obviously, Apple's going to continue to perfect this. So that's the first thing I noticed. The other thing I noticed is it just feels snappier, much snappier. And that makes sense because we know there is a dual-core processor in there. Apple said that the processor is twice as fast as the first iPad, and the graphics processing is supposed to be 9 times faster. And I got to tell you, it just felt much zippier, much faster playing around with it. So now I've had the iPad 2 for 2 days because I got it on the 11th. I didn't really play with it that much on the night of the 11th, and I played with it somewhat yesterday, and it's just zippier. Everything feels zippier. The scrolling through web pages, well, I'm going to discuss it piece by piece. Okay, so one of the coolest things that I first noticed about the iPad 2 is actually something that Gizmodo.com announced on Saturday the 12th, and that is there is a hidden feature in the iPad 2, and maybe it's just a hidden feature in the iOS, but I tried it on the iPad 2 and it worked, and it's going to amaze you. The hidden feature is that if you get the latest version of Xcode, which is free if you have a developer's account, or only $5 if you're not a developer, and you just launch it, and then you, I guess, sort of register your iPad as being development. You could just cancel it. But this process of just booting Xcode and the iPad launches hidden features in the iPad. And let me tell you what they are. They're pretty amazing. Okay, so, the cool feature is if you go into settings, you see multitasking gestures, and you can set it to on so that you can use 4 or 5 fingers to pinch to the home screen, or swipe up to reveal multitasking bar, or swipe left or right between apps. So this is really, I've got a little video of me doing this. It's tremendous when you put this on, because now if you've got several apps in the background, you can just 4-finger or 5-finger swipe left or right, and you go directly to the other apps. Now, this is something that I guess HP's touchpad's going to have, and it looks like it's coming to the iOS. I don't know why Apple has this hidden feature, but it's tremendous. I mean, if you look at this video that I did, or you could go 4-finger down, and it reveals the background bar. And you also have to do the 4-finger pinching. So the 4-finger pinching brings you right back to the home screen. So it's very cool. So if you look at my video, I'm playing around with this. It's just very impressive. You can just do the 4-finger pinch thing, and actually it also, from the home screen, the 4-finger thing brings you to the left side search thing, the search bar, if you want to search all your files. Very cool. Okay, so the other thing I show on the iPad 2, which is in my video, is it just feels much zippier, and so I demonstrate how you flip around the different Safari pages. You know how you can press that button that shows you how many Safari pages you have open, and then launch them, and it just feels quicker loading than when it was on the first iPad. So here, in this video that you can see on the video version of the podcast, I'm just surfing through different websites, and it just feels really, really fast. Now, other things also seem really fast. In particular, I show in the video version of this how I launch Flipboard, which is that great app that it turns like your social media feeds and news feeds into its own magazine. And Flipboard, which seemed a little sluggish to me on my first iPad, really is zipping around and just look. I think this is where the video graphics being 9 times faster than the regular iPad really pays off, and it's much, much faster. So I'm very impressed, and I think this video that I have that shows how quickly Flipboard flips is just so impressive. I mean, if you take a look at this, I'm just zooming through different panes of Flipboard, and it's very, very impressive. And I think this is, look, this is, I think, just the reason alone to upgrade to the iPad 2. It's just, the original iPad's fantastic, but the iPad 2 takes it to another level. And I think competitors are going to have a really hard time. Okay, so one of the other things that I did was, I have this great $69 leather smart cover, but it's only for the front side, and I'm worried about what am I going to do carrying it. So I got a Staples $1.50 packaging envelope, and I'm going to put the iPad in that. So I'm going to use this. It's only $1.50 from Staples, and it's basically one of these envelopes with bubble wrap in it that allows you to ship things. But it makes it fits perfectly with the iPad, and so I'm going to use it when I go back and forth to the office. Now, the reason I'm having a hard time putting it in here is because I've got the camera in my left hand, and I'm literally putting the iPad in with one hand into this bubble wrap envelope, which is, what is it? It's like 9.5 by 11. And really, you should just go to Staples and get it because it fits perfectly. What I may do is just it's a couple of centimeters longer than the iPad. I may cut off the flap to the envelope and clip it with scissors. Okay, so where the iPad 2 I think also really excels is it now has a gyroscope. And gyroscope makes gaming much better because it's much more reactive to your movements of the iPad. So in my video version of this podcast, I show myself testing out Real Racing HD, which is this great racing app that I've had with the iPad 1. Now I'm launching it here, and I'm actually going to race just with one hand because I'm filming with the iPhone in the left hand. But the amazing thing is, with the first version of the iPad, it had a hard time staying on track because the responsiveness wasn't there. Like when you would turn the iPad, it was kind of sluggish in rounding corners and staying on track. I usually would crash, but here I'm just using the iPad with one hand, holding it, and it's much more responsive. And I think that's because of the gyroscope. The gyroscope just makes it much more precise. Because really what you had before was an accelerometer, which works on essentially movements up and down, figuring out how much the iPhone is moving. But the gyroscope is 3 axis. And so now if you put those two together, it's going to make the iPad, which is a big device, much more responsive. So if you look in this racing video that I've done, again, I'm doing this with one hand. I'm pretty good at staying on the track and going at full speed with one hand. And I really like this app. This is Real Racing HD, and it feels even more lifelike. I mean, it felt kind of like life before, but now I think with this gyroscope, the iPad 2 is just, a phenomenal gaming device. So here I crash. Okay, so one of the new apps that Apple has come out with is one of the 2 iLife apps that are now on the iPad, one being Imovie, the other one being Garageband. And and I demoed Garageband in the video version. You can see the video, and it's just phenomenal. I mean, this is killer. This is taking iPad apps to a new level, and basically GarageBand works with GarageBand on your Mac. You can export GarageBand projects to there. But I'm showing here, for example, you can go up to 8 tracks, and you've got 2 views. One is instrument view, and one is sort of timeline view. And if anyone's ever worked with a digital audio workstation, which are these sequencers and audio recording programs that have been around since the 80s, and that's actually what got me interested in the first Mac, because I was into electronic music back in the 80s, and the Mac, it had these programs that would run synthesizers. But here, GarageBand is just phenomenal, because particularly when you go into instrument mode, because you can turn the iPad itself into an instrument, play drums, play guitar, play piano, play synthesizer, drum machine, and it will record up to 8 different tracks. And here I'm playing with this sort of electronic drum machine kit, and it's very cool. It's you can really sort of hear. It's just I don't know. It's very cool. You can play different instruments. So I think this program. If you take this program and show your iPad 2 to people and show this program, it's going to convert a lot of people, because it just shows how powerful it is, and it's a different experience than on a Mac. GarageBand on a Mac is not as fun. It's not as easy to use, because it's all about using your keyboard or your mouse. In here, you can just drag tracks and edit tracks with your finger. You can playing instruments with your finger. On a Mac, you're really limited to hooking up a MIDI keyboard or a MIDI guitar or some sort of MIDI controller like a MIDI keyboard. But here, essentially, the screen becomes an electronic instrument. In this section of the video, I show how you can just resize loops and tracks just by dragging the ends. It's very similar to the iMovie app. Now, one disappointment, though, that I have both with the iMovie and the GarageBand app is that if you have, like, let's say, a track or an audio file, I don't seem to find any place where you could split the file in 2. Rather, like with QuickTime on a Mac, you can edit a file by dragging the ends. But also there are these like smart chords that Apple has been touting in GarageBand, which are really great for people who are beginners, or even people who are not beginners, because you don't have a huge keyboard here, and you can just sort of play sort of smart chords where the computer is figuring out what chords you really meant to play. And I'm playing around with this thing. I could see myself and my kids playing with GarageBand like every day for like the next year, because it's so much fun. And I think this is going to spawn more creativity by people in creating their own music. I think you're going to see a lot of young artists come on the scene. Now, one of the reasons I like GarageBand is because I've been doing some of the iPad podcasts, recording it on the iPad or iPhone, and I never had a great recording device or application, and now I have 8 tracks. So I had been using the HT Recorder app on both the iPhone and the iPad, and that was great because you can edit stuff and cut and paste stuff around and import music, but it was limited to 1 track. And now, essentially, you can use with GarageBand, they didn't really tout this, but you could use GarageBand to be a podcast creator, because you could import loops, intros, side music, and you could do editing of a podcast right in GarageBand. So next week I'm going to try to edit the whole podcast in the iPad 2. So in this video you can see I'm strumming, I'm playing various guitar chords. It's a very cool app. I think Apple has a hit. Okay, so one accessory I urge everybody to get, particularly if they have a high definition TV, is Apple's digital AV adapter, which is essentially an HDMI and dock charger connection for your iPad. I got it. I think it's like, I don't know, how much was it? $69 or something? No, I think it was $39, or $29. It's worth it because it essentially hooks up by HDMI, both video and audio, to a plasma or an LCD TV with HDMI. And the cool thing is that it mirrors everything that's on your iPad. Before, Apple didn't have this, and this is epic because now it means you can show stuff from your iPad onto a big TV. Now, the really cool thing is, I think this is going to be great for gaming. I think certain games are going to be just really perfect for this, and one is Real Racing. It's starting out. Okay, so on the video version of the podcast, you can see me using Real Racer while in front of a plasma TV or now big LCD TV, and I'm using the iPad as the steering. But I'm looking at the big screen TV, and so it's wild. It's wild because the iPad becomes like the steering wheel, and you feel immersed in like driving on the road. And I'm hooked up, by the HDMI cable, but it's truly an incredible feeling because you don't really look at your iPad. You look ahead on the road, so you actually feel much more like you're driving on the road, because particularly if you're sitting in front of a big screen TV and using the iPad as a steering wheel. But the HDMI connector is going to be great for a lot of things. I mean, it's going to make it easier for you to watch all sorts of video content on the app, on the big screen TV. I mean, in a way, and I said this on the Apple podcast that I do, the HDMI mirroring from the iPad turns the iPad into the ultimate Apple TV, because now you can mirror all sorts of apps, and including video streaming and music streaming content apps, and they'll work on a big screen TV. For example, there's a great news app on the iPad and the iPhone called Al Jazeera English, and it's the English version of that Arabic, whatever network. And it's actually, it's very kosher in the sense that it's just straight news. And Alex Lindsay from the Mac Break Weekly with Leo Laporte, he likes that show. But you can't get it on cable TV. You can't get it on whatever over-the-air TV. You can only get it on the internet. And there's been an iPad app, and there's been an iPhone app. And so it streams 24-hour news in English. A lot of the reporters are BBC people and Americans. I had a friend who was Jewish who actually worked for Nightline, and she worked there. And so, but you can't get it anywhere on the internet, and you can't get it on the Apple TV, but you could get this streaming video app on the iPad, and now it can be permanently hooked up to the HDMI connection of a plasma or LCD TV. And Apple was very clever because in this HDMI dock, they built a second connection so you can use the power charger for the iPad with one connection. So you could leave your iPad permanently connected to an LCD TV or plasma TV, and it would be just, act as a media center. And you never have to worry about running out of charge because you would just be there. So I think it's very clever, and this sort of opens the door for the iPad 2 to essentially become the media center. Now, the other thing that's great about the mirroring is, it's great for presentations and explaining to people how to use the iPad. In schools, they're going to be able to hook up the iPad to a big screen TV through the HDMI and show how to do stuff. And the same for using Keynote. Keynote mirrors out anyways without the mirroring, but now it's going to be even easier with the HDMI. So I highly recommend it. Okay, so the other big feature that I've been playing around with in iPad 2, which was not in iPad 1, is the cameras. Of course, this is a big thing. The cameras, both the front and the back. And, well, the cameras have been getting some criticism because some people are like, oh, it's not high enough quality. And the back camera is the same camera as on the iPod Touch that came out last fall, which is a lower resolution, lower pixel density than the high picture resolution of the iPhone 4. So it can shoot high definition video, but it's very low pixel for regular pictures. And the front camera is a little better, but again, it's not going to substitute for taking pictures with the backside of the iPhone 4. But hold on, everybody, because the camera is mainly there for shooting video for purposes of FaceTime or something else. But even regular photos, I'll tell you, look kind of cool on the iPad because there's something really cool about taking pictures with such a large screen where you see the picture immediately. It's really kind of surreal almost. So, yeah, I mean, Apple could have, made the iPad 2 more expensive and invested in higher pixel counts for the camera, but for sort of vanity fun pictures, it's still pretty cool and still pretty nice. So it's not like perfect high resolution that you'll get with a Nikon D90 nice camera, but it's still fun and it doesn't look that bad. And it's a little grainy because you don't have high pixel quality, but it's still nice. So I like that feature, and the cameras aren't that bad. So I wouldn't not buy the iPad 2 because the cameras aren't the highest quality. Now, one of the really cool apps that comes free now with the iPad 2 because of the cameras is Photo Booth. Photo Booth is the sort of arcade-like photo app on the Mac, and now it's on the iPad. There is none on the iPhone. And with Photo Booth, basically, it has different filters and effects that you can choose from. Now, the filters and effects are not as extensive as on the iMac, but they're still fun. I was playing around with it, and you can choose comic book effect, swirly effects. But the one that I had the most fun with was kaleidoscope because you can really do some really wild things just, putting your face up close to the iPad. And the fact is you've got this big screen to immediately see your results makes it really, really, wild. Now, the one thing that I'm kind of disappointed by is that on the Mac, Photo Booth actually can also shoot video and apply video effects. And on the Mac, it also does blue screen effect, where it can put fake backgrounds behind you with the photo. So this Photo Booth on the iPad is not as extensive as it is on the Mac, but it's a good start. And, again, it adds to the cool, fun features that have now come to the iPad 2. So another reason to get it. Okay, so another camera-related app is, of course, FaceTime. So now FaceTime is on the iPad 2, and I've got a chance to test it out a little bit, but not extensively. Now, I have on my Mac the what do I have? I have the FaceTime beta. I never upgraded to the final, but I assume the beta is the same as the final. But one thing that's kind of annoying about FaceTime on the Mac is it looks like it has to be launched to receive a call. In other words, you have to have it on all the time. So I tried calling myself from my iPad 2 to my iMac, and I had a little bit of a trouble because I think FaceTime gets confused if, let's say, you're calling via the email method of FaceTime calling, not the phone number. So if you're calling from email to email, what if you're calling yourself? So what if I have my email on my Mac and my wife's around and I'm calling that and I have the same email that I'm calling from? That seems to pose a problem for FaceTime. So FaceTime, I don't know if other people have had this problem. FaceTime seems to work better when you have different emails or different phone numbers, I guess, calling each other. That's one glitch. But the other thing that it says about FaceTime is that it only works on Wi-Fi. And that's kind of annoying because I guess FaceTime on the iPhone 4 only works on Wi-Fi also. So even though you have an iPad with cell data, like with AT&T over 3G, you're not going to be able to make FaceTime calls. However, if you're able to jailbreak the iPhone 4, you can make a FaceTime call over cell data using an app that's a jailbroken app in the Cydia store called 3G Inhibitor. And I think that's what it's called. It's 3G Inhibitor. And 3G Inhibitor basically tricks the phone into thinking that the app, or makes the phone think that the app is running over Wi-Fi. So in other words, I can get FaceTime to run on an iPhone 4 through this 3G Inhibitor app that's in the jailbreak store, and I've tested it and it works. And so maybe the jailbreak people will have this app working on the iPad too, because ultimately FaceTime has to come to cell phone, to cell data 3G calls, because it just doesn't make sense for it to only be good over Wi-Fi. Actually, I think Skype now works over 3G. Now my iPad 2 I got is with AT&T. Now I haven't yet activated the 3G service, but I'm gonna probably do it tomorrow, and then I'll test it out. We'll see how it goes. Hopefully it works well. Okay, so the other really cool thing about the iPad 2, of course, is the smart cover. And the smart cover is the new cover for the iPad that comes from Apple. And the one big difference from last year's cover is that it's only on the front side. And it comes in both polyurethane, many different colors, and also in leather in different colors. Now, what makes it a smart cover is that it actually snaps on to the side of the iPad 2 with these metal magnetic hinges. So there are magnets in the left side of the iPad 2 in portrait mode, and the smart cover has a hinge on the left that has magnets in it, and it's really weird. Like, it really latches on quickly, and with a little effort you can snap it off. So it goes on, it has the right tension between snapping on and staying on, and the right tension in taking it off. Now the cool thing about it is on the inside it's got some lining that automatically helps clean the screen of the iPad. And also the iPad has a setting that senses when the cover is closed. So, and it shuts off, which is great, because then with the old cover, you had to go to the effort of shutting down the iPad or locking the screen before you close the cover. And here the screen just shuts down when it senses the cover over it. And so this really makes the iPad really like a different device because of this. The other cool thing is that the smart cover has 4 folds. Actually, let's see, it has 3 folds in the middle, and it allows it to fold over and roll over and bend and become like a triangle. And the triangle acts as when you flip it in the back, as a prop. And so you can rest the iPad 2 at an angle, just like you could with the other one, the last year's model, and type at an angle. Also, you can prop it vertically, and it works really well. Now, my only concern with it is there's no cover on the back side, and as I discussed before, that's why I got the Staples envelope. But the smart cover comes in different colors. Some of the colors were missing when I was, it was my turn to buy the iPad 2. I was thinking of getting the dark navy leather version. The leather is kind of expensive for what it is. It's $69. The polyurethane ones are $39. I would maybe just get the $39, but I wasn't too happy with the polyurethane cover with the first iPad. So, check it out. Obviously, you should get the smart cover when you get the iPad too. Now, people have been very sort of effusive in their praise of the smart covers that Apple's is selling. And the New York Times on the March 11th had an article called "In new case, iPad starts in an instant," and it really highlighted how the smart cover makes everything a little quicker in the iPad. And this is what the New York Times says. The article was published on March 11th by Miguel Helft. "In technology, fast is never fast enough. When Apple begins selling its iPad 2 on Friday evening, many of the new device's features may be upstaged by a lowly accessory, the smart cover, a protective case designed by Apple that snaps onto the iPad through magnets and doubles as a stand. The cover's smarts, though, come in part from being able to turn the iPad on when you open it and off when you close it. The click and finger swipe, 3 to 4 seconds, in an unscientific test, that stood between you and the digital world and in the original iPad, gone." So, it goes on to say, tech bloggers are reacting with effusive praise for the cover, with comments ranging from magical to mind-blowing. John Gruber, an influential blogger, said the smart cover may be the main reason some owners of the original iPad want to upgrade to the new version. So it's interesting. It's a very interesting article, and I think the smart cover is great, but this article makes it sound like it's the main reason to upgrade, and I don't think it's the main reason to upgrade. And I also wonder if this ability to turn the iPad on and off just by opening the cover is going to be limited to the smart cover. It could be that there's just a sensor in the iPad that recognizes when the cover is coming down. Maybe third-party vendors will be able to make covers that also act in this smart way. So, it's definitely a very clever addition that really nobody saw coming. I mean, there were all these people predicting what the iPad 2 would have, and nobody saw or even predicted, despite numerous leaks, nobody predicted that there would be this great cover. So check it out. Okay, so one of the more interesting articles that came out as to what the iPad 2 means overall came out from Marco Arment, and he's someone I highly respect. Marco Arment is, and I hope I'm saying his name correctly, is the developer of the Instapaper app and the Instapaper service, and actually he was one of the key people behind the Tumblr blog until he started devoting himself full-time to Instapaper. But he has his own blog called marco.org, and he came out with a post on today, March 13th, that's kind of provocative and interesting. And basically, the gist of his post is, what does the iPad mean for office productivity? And the title of the post is "Moving On from iPad Office Productivity Apps." And I guess he's suggesting that Apple is giving up on the premise that the iPad will be a great office productivity device. And he says, in the last decade, Apple introduced their first line of notebooks that didn't have dial-up modems built in because dial-up modems were on their way out and most people didn't need them anymore. But for the few that still did, they offered a little USB modem to ease the transition. Then he goes on to say 3 years ago, Apple introduced the MacBook Air that had the first notebook that abandoned the optical drive. And now he's saying that with the iPad, Apple has abandoned the dock with the keyboard. And I guess it didn't sell a lot of those docks with the keyboard. And then he's basically saying that, look, In the new promo for the iPad, it's really emphasizing the iLife apps like Garageband and iMovie, which are more fun than the iWork apps like Pages and Keynotes. And he basically says, I think he's saying in a nice way that the iPad's not really great for office productivity, and that a lot of people don't like to use any keyboard, whether it's a Bluetooth keyboard or the keyboard on the iPad, and that it's not really, great for productivity. It's more for consumption and fun. I mean, that's how I take his article to be. The conclusion is, he says, I still don't think Apple has found the sweet spot for the iPad's usage, the ideal role it fills in personal computing, and I don't think we as developers or iPad owners have found it either. But I know the sweet spot exists, and for a computer category that has only existed for 1 year, we're rushing towards its remarkably quickly. That is why iPad is truly exciting. We can see that it has great potential, and while we don't quite know its nature, we're pretty sure that it's huge. But I disagree with him in this respect. The people who feel challenged or feel that the iPad, whether it's the iPad 1 or iPad 2, have shortcomings, are usually highly productive computer people, almost tech people. And what they don't realize is that the iPad is actually very useful for everyday people who work and can find use for it in businesses. I know I now load a lot of work PDFs onto the iPad because it's a very convenient place to store PDFs of documents for easy mobile reading. And I'm sure a lot of other people are doing that in business. And once the iPad starts rolling out in more enterprise situations, people are going to find that it's a more useful internet browser than anything a computer can give you. I mean, people don't like to sit at a desk hunched over looking at a computer. I find my browsing on the iPad with Safari to be much more enjoyable and much easier to read. I can sit reclined. When you're at a computer, whether it's a laptop or a desktop or like an iMac, you're always leaning forward when you're reading stuff on the internet, because the computer is not on your lap. I guess if you have a laptop, you're sitting back, but it's still an awkward position if you're sitting back with a laptop, because the screen is at it. Let's say you're sitting on a couch or a chair and you've got this laptop. The screen is sort of vertical. It's not an ideal viewing angle because the laptop is down on your lap and you really have to bend the screen over. The ideal reading of any Safari or web page when you're sitting down and leaning back is really the iPad, because it's like a book. You can tilt it forward, or like a magazine. But also, Marco misses that there's a lot of great productivity apps that have come out and even before iPad 2 came out, that fully demonstrate how great the iPad is for enterprise. I mean, we've seen story after story. I mean, one story recently came out that the iPad has been certified as a airplane cockpit, device to put all your airplane charts and maps. We've seen doctors doing rounds with the iPad with medical information for each patient on the iPad. We have seen in the legal field, we've seen a number of developers who've come out with apps that allow you to display documents and exhibits to juries while you're in court. The iPad will make a great companion for lawyers who more and more are using computers in the courtroom to present their case to jurors. There's also an app that helps lawyers who are picking a jury keep track of all their questions and answers. And then, believe me, in the courtroom, the iPad is more subliminal and useful for an advocate than a computer. And I got to tell you, like I've used the iPad even before iPad 2 to do productivity. I've used it to record podcasts using HT Recorder. It's a great audio app. I've used it to edit movies even before iMovie came out on the iPad 2, and I haven't discussed iMovie 2, but I will touch on it briefly. There's an app that already allowed you to edit movies on the iPad, and that's called Real Director, which is very powerful, and I feel bad for them because everybody forgets them. And word processing and keynote presentations. I've done all sorts of keynote presentations using the iPad, and for word processing, I've sent over Word documents and opened them in Pages and added to them. So I think I think the iPad is well on its way to being a very useful office device, and I think this coming year it's going to show that. Okay, so speaking of iMovie, the other big iLife app that's on the iPad for the first time is iMovie, and it costs $4.99. Garageband is also $4.99. Now the thing is, if you already bought iMovie on the iPhone or iPod Touch, then this version on the iPad is free. It's just a free upgrade. So although it says $4.99 when you go to it and when it's in your, when you're logged in on your account, if you click on it, they're not going to charge you because it's basically going to be free. So iMovie is, I guess in some ways it's a lot like iMovie was on the iPhone. There's just a couple more themes, and you can also have a theme to upload to CNN. And on the iPad, though, the editing is a little easier, dragging sections of clips and making the transitions it's a little easier. To me, I've played around with it a little bit. The one thing that I don't find in iMovie that I think it should have is you can shorten movie clips by dragging the ends, but I don't see a split clip feature. I may be wrong, but I don't see a precision editor that does that easily. Now, I got to tell you, there's another app that in some ways is a rival movie editing app that competes with iMovie, and let me tell you about it. Okay, so if you want to make movies and edit movies on the iPad and you're going to get iMovie, then I also suggest you spend a lousy $2, because that's all it costs, to get Real Director. And, Real Director's not advertising with me. I don't do any ads. I'm just an amateur podcaster, and I do this for fun. But I've been using Real Director for a long time because long before iMovie came out on the iPhone, Real Director was the first movie editing app on the iPhone, and then it went to the iPad long before iMovie went to the iPad, and it's only $1.99, and I use both of them. And one of the things that I like about Real Director is that you can split clips. You can split a movie clip in the middle and make it 2 movie clips, because when you're video editing, that's something that's really helpful and important. Plus, you can bring in additional music from your computer. You have to do that in iMovie. You just have access to anything in your iTunes on your iPad or iPhone. But Apple limits other apps' ability to tap into music in iTunes on the iPad and iPhone. So at Real Director, you have to drag music or audio that you want to use through the iTunes syncer on a Mac or Windows. If you're not familiar with it, when you sync an iPhone, iPod Touch, or iPad to iTunes, when it's docked in there, if you click Application, you'll see at the bottom certain applications where you can add data in by clicking Look in Folder, and you can just drag stuff in. But Real Director has a lot of the same features as iMovie. Plus, it has the ability to split clips. It can now do high quality HD. So it really rivals the iMovie app. It won Apple's Rewind 2010 Hot Trends in Apps, and in 2009, it won Apple's Rewind 2009 Best App Award. So both of these are great movie apps. I'm glad iMovie finally, works on iPad, but also check out Real Director. Okay, so the initial benchmark testing of the iPad 2 is out now, and it looks like it's a really powerful beast. Now, the website electronista.com had I think one of the best articles, which came out on March 12th, Saturday. It was entitled iPad 2 Benchmarks Trounce Zoom. Zoom is pretty much the only tablet competitor out there from Motorola. And here's what the article says. Early detailed benchmarks of the iPad 2's performance have provided a surprise win by Apple over the Motorola Zoom. Despite NVIDIA's reputation for fast graphics, AnandTech found the PowerVR SGX54 3MP2 in the iPad 2 was in some cases several times faster in Imagination Technologies GL Benchmark 2.0 than in Zoom's Tegra 2 chip. So in other words, it's faster in the benchmark of video performance. So the article goes on to say, while the Zoom has to drive a higher 1280 x 800 resolution, the differences wouldn't have been enough to claim the edge. It then goes on to say that web tests, these are tests that rely more heavily on the processor, also favored Apple. Both Apple's A5 and NVIDIA's Tegra 2 are ARM Cortex A9 processors, but the iPad 2 loaded pages significantly faster. The benchmark was both a demonstration, this is what the article says, of whatever optimizations were made in the A5, as well as the Nitro JavaScript engine. Nitro JavaScript engine is this new, web JavaScript engine that Apple came out with to make the Safari browser on the iPad faster, not just for the iPad 2, but for the original iPad. So the article goes on to say, for Google, the loss might be felt deeper as it has built the reputation of its Chrome desktop browser, which Android 3.0 shares on speed. So the article basically says, that we're seeing great performances. Now, that's not surprising. So Electronista actually put together two charts on its website. The first chart is entitled 2011 Page Load Test Average. Page load time average, time milliseconds lower is better. So the Apple iPad 2 had a score of 2364. The Motorola Zoom had a score of 3021, which is, wow, it's almost 40% slower than the iPad 2. And the iPad original had 3692. So, Apple has definitely increased that score. Now, in addition to that chart, Electronista had another chart entitled GL Benchmark 2.0 Pro, frames per second higher is better. And so this is just the video graphics speed. Now look at this. The original iPad had a score of 17.6. The Motorola Zoom had a score of 26.7, so a lot faster than the original iPad. But the iPad 2 has a score of 57.6, which is multiple times faster than the original iPad and twice as fast as the Motorola Zoom. So this is really going to give Apple a huge advantage. Now, iFixit.com, the website that tears apart things, has already teared apart the iPad and 2, and clearly the RAM is 512 megabytes, so that's obviously helping with the speed a lot. And the processor, the A5, is a dual core processor, but we know that from Apple's own disclosure. Okay, so finally, if you wanted to know how much of the parts in iPad 2 costs, there's a report out from the website mobileburn.com. I guess it's reporting on what the research from iSupply figured out. And iSupply figured out, based on a teardown of the new iPad 2, that the total cost of the AT&T's iPad 2 3G is, in terms of the parts, is $326.60. So Apple's selling the AT&T 16 gigabyte iPad 2 for, I think, $625 or $629. The Verizon one is slightly cheaper at $323.35. So Apple's getting about an 80% markup on the parts. But remember, in terms of cost, Apple has got research and labor and this is just the pure parts. The cost of assembling this stuff has to cost something too, and plus the overhead and the research. So I think Apple's margin is more like 38% or something like that for these devices. Okay, so what about jailbreaking? Well, word came out today, while I'm recording this on the 13th, that the iPad 2 has been jailbroken. And word comes from a website called redmondpie.com. And there's a post there that says, yes, you read right. The famous iPhone developer and hacker Comex, who previously released userland jailbreaks such as Spirit and Jailbreak Me, has done the magic yet again. And boy, why would you want to jailbreak? Apple's sort of added in a lot of the things that you would have wanted, which you couldn't get until you jailbroke before. You have folders now. You have with this touch swiping between apps. If it looks like Apple's going to implement that, that's another feature that jailbreakers like, the ability to swipe between apps. And a lot of people are going to say, well, why do you need to jailbreak if you can do the mirroring out? I've jailbroken, and there's a developer who's got some really cool jailbreak apps named Ryan Petrick. And one app that he's had that I've used in the past is Display Out. And Display Out would allow you to mirror everything on the iPad, the original iPad, through the AV dock connector. Now, some people are having a debate on whether or not the iPad 2 can mirror. Is the mirroring based on the hardware or the software? I think Apple is comfortable that this hardware is good enough that it's not going to fail. But you can, even with the iPad, mirror, because the jailbreak app Display Out, which was only like a couple of bucks and worked with settings, which you could get in the settings of the original iPad, would allow you to mirror out. And it worked pretty well. I didn't see it really failing that much. And it did it through the AV connector. And so I don't think Apple is officially supporting mirroring out on the original iPad. So people might want to still buy Display Out. And I don't think you can do mirroring through the AV dock connector. So if you don't feel like paying extra for the HDMI connector and want to mirror out, you might want to get Display Out. But another reason to jailbreak is screen recording. Now, a lot of fellow podcasters and people who like to do screen recording, that's where you do a movie recording, the apps as they run. You couldn't do that before. And now some people are saying, with the HDMI mirroring out, you're going to be able to do that. The problem with the HDMI mirroring out, there's two problems. One, it's not easy to do. You gotta pay several $100s for hardware that you plug the HDMI connector out of your iPad into, and then that hardware hooks up to your Mac and converts it over to some sort of video that you can use on your Mac. But one problem with that is you don't get a lot of the good features that you can through a screen recording app that that Ryan Petrick made both for the iPad and for the iPhone I think it's called Display Recorder. And I forget how much that is. It's like $3 or $4, bucks. And Display Recorder doesn't record any sound, but it records the video on your iPhone or iPad of you using an app. And it also, through Wi-Fi, allows you to broadcast your screen recording in real time on a browser on your computer. And actually, you can also then record using screen capture then on your Mac or Windows, that screen recording broadcast. But the big thing that Display Recorder has is it can follow your fingers and your clicking, and have like your finger clicking appear in a sort of like light white buttons that float around, so that the viewer can see where you've touched. And recording out with HDMI, you're not going to get that. So there is also, like I mentioned before, another reason you might want to do it is to get this 3G inhibitor program that would allow you to have certain apps that Apple only wants to run through Wi-Fi run through 3G. For example, Apple and AT&T would limit the download size of files in the iTunes store. So if you were out and about and wanted to download, let's say, a long podcast like mine, you couldn't do it over 3G. But with the 3G inhibitor, you could, because I don't know, the iPhone or the iPad would be fooled into thinking it's on Wi-Fi. So it looks like this jailbreak of the iPad 2. It looks like it's going to be released very soon, so I'll probably take a look at it. Okay, so I guess this is the last story, the actual last story today, which is it looks like there's shortages of iPad 2s because almost immediately now it's Sunday night the 13th, and if you go to Apple's online website, it says that it takes 3 to 4 weeks for the iPad 2 to ship if you buy it. Now, on the 11th, when it came out in the morning, it said 3 to 5 business days, and within an hour or so, it said 5 to 7 business days for shipping. And then it went to, I guess, 1 or 2 weeks. Now we're up to 3 to 4 weeks. And the price of these iPads on eBay and on Craigslist has gone up. So let's take the 3G 16 gigabyte AT&T Black iPad, which goes for $629 plus tax in the Apple's online store. On eBay, it's selling sometimes north of $850, sometimes north of $900. So the question is, why is there a shortage? There were very long lines at the Apple store, so it could be there's just crazy demand, or also there could be supply issues. One rumor is that maybe there are supply issues relating to the massive and tragic earthquake in Japan, which occurred on the same day that the iPad 2 came out. I don't think Apple's distribution is really through Japan, but it could have disrupted supply routes there, so it's unclear. Anyways, this is a hot commodity, and I'm glad I stood in line and got it on day one, because it truly is a transformative device. Okay, so thanks for listening to, I guess, episode 45 of the iPad podcast. This has been, I think, a particularly special one because of iPad 2 coming out. And please check out the video version of this, which you can get at Apple Things by MaxFuture.com on the iTunes bookstore, because that's where the video version of this will be. And you'll actually see some of the video of me playing around with the iPad 2 and different apps. Also the video of me standing in line. And don't hesitate to send me an email at maxfuture@gmail.com or leave a comment or voicemail at 617-826-9676, which is the Google Voice mail for maxfuture.com. This is Lex, and thanks for listening. And I'll have more News on iPad 2 next week.